On this channel, we provide useful programming information with practical code examples. This time, we will cover the best practices for conditional statements in Python. The if statement in Python is a fundamental construct for implementing conditional branching, and it greatly impacts code readability and maintainability. Here, we will discuss in detail the best practices for using if statements. Enabling subtitles will make the code descriptions easier to understand. First, let's look at an example of using concise and explicit conditional expressions. Write conditional expressions concisely and explicitly, avoiding redundant statements. In Python, you can indicate that a condition is true by writing if condition. Next, let's look at an example of splitting conditions and assigning them to variables. When combining multiple conditions, use AND, OR. However, when conditional expressions become complex, readability may decrease, so consider the following adjustments. By splitting conditions and assigning them to variables, readability can be improved. Next, let's look at an example of AND, OR, short-circuit evaluation. In conditional expressions using AND, OR, if the result can be determined by only the left-hand value, short-circuit evaluation occurs and the right-hand side is not evaluated. Understanding this helps you avoid unnecessary processing and prevent errors. By utilizing short-circuit evaluation, you can improve processing efficiency and safety. Next, let's look at an example of clarifying the precedence of AND, OR. AND has higher precedence than OR. Therefore, when combining conditions naively, you may get unintended results. It's important to use parentheses to make your intentions clear. By using parentheses, you can clarify the precedence of AND, OR, reducing the risk of unexpected bugs. Next, let's look at an example of utilizing truthy and falsy values. In Python, the following values are evaluated as false, none, false, the number 0, including 0.0. Empty sequence types, such as empty lists, tuples, or strings. Empty dictionary. Leveraging this can help simplify your conditional expressions. Next, let's look at an example of proper use of else if and else. When evaluating multiple conditions, use else if. Use else to define a default behavior at the end. Else is not mandatory. If all conditions are covered, it can be omitted. Pay attention to the order of conditional expressions and arrange them logically without redundancy. Next, let's look at an example of reducing nesting depth. Deep nesting of if statements makes the code harder to read. Using early returns can reduce nesting and make the code more concise. Next, let's look at an example of avoiding single-line if statements. It is possible to write if statements in a single line, but this may reduce readability. Using single-line if statements is acceptable only for short conditions or actions, but avoid writing overly verbose code. Next, let's look at an example of simplification using the ternary operator or. For simple conditional branches, using the ternary operator or can make your code more concise. However, overusing these can make your code harder to read, so they should only be used for simple and intuitive conditions. For simple conditions, using the ternary operator or can make your code shorter and easier to understand. Next, let's look at an example of caching conditional expressions. Conditional expressions involving expensive calculations or function calls can be cached in variables to improve performance. Python's if statements are simple and powerful tools, but improper use can make code complex and hard to read. By adopting the best practices introduced here, you can improve the readability, maintainability, and efficiency of your code. The source code for this video can be downloaded from the official website. If you like, please visit the URL in the description to aid your learning. Thank you for watching. This channel provides practical and useful information about programming. Subscribe to the channel and let's deepen our programming skills together.